Theodore Winters stood at the window of his estate, watching the rain streak down the glass. His home was magnificent by any standard. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year. Yet it felt emptier than the day he moved in. 3 years had passed since the accident that took Rebecca from him, but the silence in the house still echoed with her absence. Behind him, Sophie played quietly with her dolls in the corner of the living room. His daughter had her mother's gentle eyes and soft brown hair. At 5 years old, she should have been running through the halls, laughing and causing cheerful chaos. Instead, she moved through the house like a whisper, as if afraid to disturb. The grief that hung in every room. Theodore had tried. He truly had. But between managing his technology company and dealing with his own pain, he found himself growing more distant from Sophie each day. The nannies came and went, some intimidated by his cold demeanor, others simply unable to connect with his withdrawn daughter. He needed someone different this time, someone who would stay. His assistant, Patricia, had arranged an interview for this afternoon. Theodore glanced at his watch. The candidate would arrive any minute. He had learned not to expect much from these meetings anymore. An unexpected arrival, the doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. Theodore appreciated punctuality. He opened the door to find a young woman standing on his doorstep, clutching a worn leather bag. She wore a simple navy dress and flat shoes, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. What struck him most was her posture, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, as if she was trying to make herself smaller. "Mr. Winters, I'm Caroline Hayes," she said softly, extending her hand without quite meeting his gaze. Her handshake was brief and uncertain. Theodore studied her as he led her inside. She was younger than he expected, perhaps in her late 20s. There was something fragile about her, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her obvious nervousness. "Please, sit." Theodore gestured to the leather sofa in his study. Caroline perched on the edge, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Patricia tells me you have experience with young children." "Yes, sir. I worked at Riverside Children's Center for 3 years, and before that I helped care for my neighbor's twins." Caroline's voice was steady but soft, as if she was unused to speaking at normal volume. Theodore ran through his standard questions: availability, references, expectations. Caroline answered each one carefully, thoughtfully. She never tried to impress him with exaggerated claims or false enthusiasm. Instead, she spoke plainly about her love for working with children and her understanding that Sophie needed patience and consistency. "My daughter has been through a great deal," Theodore said, watching Caroline's face carefully. "She needs someone who will be present, who will notice the small things. Can you do that?" For the first time, Caroline looked directly at him. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, and in them Theodore saw something unexpected. Genuine, compassion mixed with a deeper sadness that seemed to mirror his own. "I understand loss, Mr. Winters," she said quietly, "and I understand children who carry pain they cannot express. I promise to care for Sophie as if she were my own." Something in her words resonated with Theodore, though he could not explain why. Against his better judgment, he found himself offering her the position. The test begins. Caroline started the next morning. Theodore watched from his study as she introduced herself to Sophie. His daughter, usually shy with strangers, seemed curious about the new nanny. Caroline did not force interaction or speak in the artificially cheerful tone many caregivers used. Instead, she sat on the floor near Sophie and began quietly organizing the scattered toys, respecting the child's space. After an hour, Sophie moved closer. By lunchtime, she was showing Caroline her favorite doll. Theodore felt a mixture of relief and something else he could not quite identify. Jealousy, perhaps, that this stranger could reach his daughter when he could not. That evening, after Caroline left, Theodore made his decision. He had been burned before by people who seemed trustworthy. He would not risk his daughter's safety or his own peace of mind without being certain of Caroline's character. He went to his private study and opened the wall safe. Inside were stacks of cash he kept for emergencies, along with important documents and his wife's jewelry. Theodore removed several $1,000s and arranged the bills so they were clearly visible. Then he left the safe door slightly ajar, not obviously open, but enough that someone cleaning the room would notice. The next step was more calculated. Theodore installed a small camera on the bookshelf, angled to capture the entire study. The device was no larger than a pen, and virtually undetectable unless someone knew exactly where to look. He tested the feed on his phone, ensuring the image was clear. "Forgive me, Caroline," he murmured to the empty room, "but I have to know who." "You really are." The following morning, Theodore left for his office earlier than usual. He told Caroline he had important meetings and might not return until evening. He asked her to clean the house thoroughly, including his study. Caroline nodded, understanding, in her eyes, as if she sensed this was somehow important. The revelation Theodore could barely concentrate at work. Every hour, he checked the camera feed on his phone, watching Caroline move through the house with Sophie. She played games with his daughter, read stories in funny voices, and prepared lunch with Sophie standing on a stool beside her, helping. His daughter was smiling, truly smiling, in a way Theodore had not seen in years. Finally, Caroline entered the study with her cleaning supplies. Theodore's heart rate increased as he watched her dust the shelves and vacuum the carpet. She worked, methodically, carefully, treating his possessions with respect. Then she approached the safe. Theodore leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the small screen. Caroline noticed the open door immediately. Her hand moved toward it, and Theodore held his breath, but Caroline did not reach for the money. Instead, her attention caught on something else entirely. On the shelf beside the safe sat a framed photograph, one of the last pictures taken of Rebecca before the accident. She was laughing in the image, her face radiant with joy. Caroline picked up the photograph with trembling hands. Theodore watched as her expression crumbled. Tears began streaming down her face. She pressed the frame to her chest and sank into Theodore's desk chair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Theodore stared at his phone in complete confusion. This was not the reaction of a thief caught red-handed. This was raw, genuine grief. Caroline sat there for nearly 5 minutes, crying over a photograph of a woman she supposedly did not know. Finally, she composed herself. Caroline wiped her eyes, carefully cleaned the glass of the frame with her sleeve, and placed it back exactly where it had been. She glanced at the open safe, seemed to consider closing it, then left it as she found it. She finished cleaning the room and left, closing the door softly behind her. Theodore replayed the footage 3 times, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The money had been irrelevant to Caroline, but Rebecca's photograph had broken something inside her. How was that possible? Who was Caroline Hayes, and what connection did she have to his late wife? He left work immediately and drove home faster than he should have. When he arrived, Sophie was in the garden with Caroline, picking flowers. Both looked up as he approached, and Theodore saw the tracks of dried tears still visible on Caroline's cheeks. "Caroline," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We need to talk, now." Caroline's face went pale as Theodore led her into the study. Sophie remained in the garden, distracted by a butterfly. Theodore closed the door and turned to face the young woman, who suddenly seemed even smaller than before. "I need you to be honest with me," Theodore began, keeping his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Today, when you were cleaning this room, something happened. I need to know what it was." Caroline's hands twisted together nervously. Her eyes darted to the photograph of Rebecca, then quickly away. "Mr. Winters, I can explain." "Then please do." Theodore crossed his arms, waiting. Part of him wanted to fire her immediately for whatever deception this was. Another part, the part that had watched her genuine tears on the camera footage, needed to understand. Caroline took a shaky breath. When I saw the position advertised, I recognized your name. I knew who you were before I ever came to this house. She paused, gathering courage. Your wife, Rebecca. I knew her. Theodore felt his chest tighten. That's impossible. Rebecca never mentioned anyone named Caroline Hayes. In all our years together, she never spoke of you. She wouldn't have, Caroline said quietly. Because when she knew me, my name was Caroline Murphy. I changed it years ago after everything. That happened. A story unfolds. Theodore gestured for Caroline to sit, then took the chair across from her. His mind raced with questions, but he forced himself to listen. I was 17 when I met Rebecca, Caroline began, her voice barely above a whisper. I had run away from home. My stepfather was dangerous, violent. My mother refused to believe me when I told her what he was doing. So one night, I took what little money I had saved and left. Caroline's hands trembled as she spoke. Theodore noticed she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, as if looking at him would make the words harder to say. I ended up at a shelter on the east side of the city. Sunrise House, it was called. I was scared, alone, and I had nowhere else to go. That's where Rebecca found me. Theodore's breath caught. He remembered Sunrise House. Rebecca had volunteered there every Thursday evening, bringing donated clothes and helping serve meals. She had been passionate about helping young people in crisis, but she had never mentioned Caroline specifically. Rebecca saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, Caroline continued, her voice thick with emotion. She didn't just hand me a meal and move on. She sat with me. She listened. She made me feel like I mattered when the whole world had told me I didn't. How long did you know her? Theodore asked. 6 months. She visited the shelter every week and eventually she helped me find a safe place to stay. She connected me with counselors, helped me get my documentation in order, even gave me money for books when I enrolled in community college. Caroline finally looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. She saved my life, Mr. Winters, and I never got the chance to thank her properly. Theodore stood and walked to the window, processing this information. It sounded exactly like something Rebecca would do. She had always been generous with her time and resources, especially for young people who needed help. But something still did not make sense. If Rebecca meant so much to you, why did you change your name? Why did you disappear from her life? The dark truth, Caroline's face crumpled. Because of what happened with my stepfather. He found me about 7 months after I left home. He was furious that I had exposed him, that social services had started. Asking questions, one night he showed up at my apartment. Theodore turned back to face her, dread building in his stomach. He attacked me, Caroline said simply. I managed to fight him off and call the police, but the trauma was too much. I couldn't stay in the city anymore. Everything reminded me of that night. My lawyer helped me legally change my name, and I moved 3 states away. I cut ties with everyone from that period of my life because I was terrified he would find me again, including Rebecca, Theodore said softly. Caroline nodded, tears streaming freely now. I tried to write to her once, about a year later. I wanted her to know I was safe, that I was grateful, but I couldn't bring myself to send the letter. I was ashamed of how broken I still was. Rebecca had invested so much in helping me, and I felt like I had failed her by running away. Theodore sat down heavily. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there were still gaps. How did you know Rebecca had passed away? I saw her obituary online 2 years ago, Caroline whispered. I was searching for her, trying to work up the courage to reach out. When I read that she had died in an accident, I felt like I had lost the only person who had ever truly believed in me. I never even got to tell her what she meant to me. The room fell silent, except for Caroline's quiet crying. Theodore felt his own grief resurface, mixing with an unexpected empathy for this woman who had lost Rebecca too, in her own way. Questions and doubts. After a long moment, Theodore spoke again. Caroline, I understand what you've told me, but I still don't understand why you came here. Why did you apply to be Sophie's nanny? You must have known this would be difficult. Caroline wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't plan it, not exactly. When I saw the advertisement from your assistant, something inside me felt pulled to apply. I told myself it was just a job, that I needed the work. But the truth is, I wanted to feel close to Rebecca again. I wanted to do something that might honor her memory. Theodore frowned. By taking care of my daughter? By helping someone Rebecca loved, Caroline said earnestly. I knew from her obituary that she had a young daughter. I thought perhaps I could give Sophie some of the kindness and patience that Rebecca gave to me. It seemed like the only way I could repay what she did for me. Theodore wanted to believe her. Everything in Caroline's story rang true, and her grief over the photograph had been undeniably real, but years of protecting himself and Sophie had taught him to be cautious. Do you have any proof of what you're telling me? He asked. Anything that connects you to Rebecca from that time? Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, worn and creased from years of handling. I kept this. It's the letter I wrote to Rebecca but never sent. You can read it if you want. And there's something else. She carefully removed a small photograph from the envelope. It showed a younger Caroline, her face thinner and marked by hardship, standing next to Rebecca outside a building Theodore recognized as Sunrise House. Rebecca had her arm around Caroline's shoulders, and both were smiling. Theodore took the photograph with unsteady hands. There was no mistaking his wife's face, her warmth evident even in the faded image. And the young woman beside her, though changed by time, was unmistakably Caroline. Trust and fear. I should have told you from the beginning, Caroline said, her voice breaking. I know I should have been honest about knowing Rebecca, but I was afraid you would think I had ulterior motives. I was afraid you wouldn't let me help. Theodore studied the photograph for a long moment. Rebecca looked happy in the image, purposeful. This was the work that had filled her with such satisfaction. He had supported it, but never fully understood how deeply she had connected with the people she helped. What happened in my study today? Theodore asked quietly. When you saw the photograph. Caroline's voice was barely audible. It had been so long since I had seen her face clearly. All I had was that one small picture. Seeing her there, so vivid and alive, it overwhelmed me. I miss her, Mr. Winters. I miss knowing she exists in the world. Theodore felt his throat tighten. He understood, that feeling better than Caroline could know. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Caroline said hesitantly. Something I discovered recently that made me even more certain I needed to be here. Theodore looked up sharply. What is it? Caroline took a deep breath. About 3 months ago, I learned that my stepfather was released from prison. He served 8 years for what he did to me, but now he's free. He's been trying to find me. I've seen evidence that he's tracked me to this city. Fear shot through Theodore. You're telling me you brought danger to my home? To my daughter? No, Caroline said quickly, her eyes wide with alarm. I would never put Sophie at risk. I took every precaution. I changed my name, I moved, I erased my digital footprint. He has no way of connecting Caroline Hayes to Caroline Murphy. That's part of why I needed this job. Living here, in your home, provides a layer of security. He would never think to look for me in the household of a wealthy businessman. Theodore stood abruptly, anger and concern warring inside him. This is exactly the kind of thing you should have disclosed before taking this position. What if he does find you? What if he comes here? He won't, Caroline insisted, standing as well. I've been careful. My lawyer helped me establish a completely new identity. Please, Mr. Winters, I'm not trying to use you. I genuinely care about Sophie. In the short time I've known her, she's become precious to me. I would never do anything to put her in harm's way. Theodore paced the room, his mind spinning. This was so much more complicated than he had anticipated. Caroline was not a simple opportunist or a thief. She was a damaged young woman with a genuine connection to his late wife, seeking refuge and purpose. But she also brought potential danger, however remote. I need time to think about this, Theodore said finally. Everything you've told me changes the situation completely. Caroline nodded, resignation in her eyes. I understand if you want me to leave. I never meant to deceive you or complicate your life. I just wanted to help. Theodore looked at her standing there, vulnerable and frightened, and saw echoes of the girl Rebecca had helped years ago. He thought of Sophie in the garden, genuinely happy for the first time in months. He thought of Rebecca and what she would want him to do. You can stay, he heard himself say, for now. But we're going to do this properly. You'll provide me with all your documentation, your lawyer's contact information, everything. And if there's even the slightest hint that your stepfather has found you, you tell me immediately. Understood? Caroline's face flooded with relief. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Winters. I promise you won't regret this. I hope not, Theodore said quietly. As Caroline left the study to return to Sophie, Theodore sat down at his desk, the photograph of young Caroline and Rebecca still in his hand. His test had revealed something far more complex than he had expected. Caroline had not been tempted by money because she was not driven by greed. She was driven by grief, gratitude, and a desire to honor someone who had changed her life. But was that enough reason to trust her with his daughter's safety? Theodore did not have an answer yet. All he knew was that Rebecca had seen something worth saving in Caroline years ago. Perhaps it was time for him to have that same faith. Outside, he could hear Sophie's laughter as Caroline pushed her on the garden swing. The sound was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Theodore closed his eyes and made a silent promise to Rebecca. He would protect their daughter, but he would also honor the work his wife had done by giving Caroline a chance to heal. The question now was whether that chance would lead to redemption or disaster. 3 weeks passed since Caroline's confession, and Theodore found himself watching her more carefully than ever. Not with suspicion, but with growing curiosity. She moved through the house like a gentle breeze, bringing warmth to spaces that had been cold for too long. Sophie blossomed under her care, speaking more, laughing freely, even asking Theodore to join their games in the evening. Caroline had provided everything he requested. Her lawyer's information checked out, her documentation was legitimate, and there had been no sign of trouble. Yet Theodore sensed she was still holding something back. There were moments when he caught her staring at Rebecca's photographs with an expression he could not quite interpret. It was more than grief or gratitude. It was something deeper, more personal. One evening after Sophie was asleep, Theodore found Caroline in the kitchen preparing her simple dinner. She startled when he entered, nearly dropping the plate she was holding. "I'm sorry, Mr. Winters. I thought you were working in your study," she said quickly. "I was, but I think we need to talk again." Theodore pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. "Please sit with me." Caroline hesitated, then slowly sat down across from him. Her hands folded in her lap, that familiar nervous gesture he had come to recognize. "You've been wonderful with Sophie," Theodore began. "She's happier than I've seen her in years. For that, I'm grateful. But I still feel like there's something you're not telling me, something important." Caroline's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Theodore waited patiently. "You're right," she finally whispered. "There is something else. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but I was terrified of how you would react." Theodore felt his stomach tighten. "What is it?" Caroline stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to him. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear. "Rebecca wasn't just a mentor to me, Mr. Winters. She was family, the hidden truth." Theodore stood slowly, his heart pounding. "What do you mean, family?" Caroline turned to face him, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Rebecca was my sister. My older sister by 12 years. The words hit Theodore like a physical blow. He gripped the back of the chair to steady himself. "That's impossible. Rebecca never mentioned having a sister. Her parents told me she was an only child." "That's what everyone believed," Caroline said, her voice shaking. "Because our parents gave me up when I was born. They didn't want another child, especially not one who came so unexpectedly. They were older, established, and I was a mistake they chose to erase." Theodore sank back into the chair, his mind reeling. "Rebecca never said anything." "She didn't know about me until she was 25, Caroline explained, returning to the table but remaining standing. "A family friend told her the truth during a moment of guilt. Rebecca was devastated. She immediately started searching for me, and when she found me at 17, I was already in that terrible situation with my stepfather, the couple who adopted you," Theodore said slowly, understanding dawning. Caroline nodded. "They seemed perfect on paper. Successful, stable, wanting to provide a good home. But my adoptive mother was weak, and my stepfather was a monster. Rebecca found me 3 months after I ran away. When she sat with me at that shelter, she didn't tell me who she really was at first. She wanted to earn my trust naturally." "When did she tell you?" Theodore asked. "After 2 months. She showed me photographs, documents, everything. I couldn't believe it at first. I had always felt so alone. And suddenly I had a sister who actually wanted me." Caroline wiped her eyes. "Rebecca made me promise not to contact our parents. She said they had made their choice, and she didn't want them to hurt me again by rejecting me a second time." Theodore's hands trembled as he processed this revelation. "Why didn't she tell me? We were together for 5 years. We shared everything." "She was going to," Caroline said softly. "She told me she planned to introduce us properly once I was more stable, once I had healed enough. But then I disappeared after the attack. Rebecca tried to find me, but I had changed my name and moved away. By the time I was ready to reconnect, I discovered she had died." Pieces fall into place. Theodore stood and paced the kitchen, his mind racing through memories. Suddenly, small moments from his marriage began making sense. Rebecca's intense dedication to helping young people in crisis, her emotional reaction whenever they discussed having a second child, the way she sometimes stared out windows with a distant, sad expression when she thought he was not watching. "Sophie," Theodore said suddenly, turning to Caroline. "Does Sophie—" "No, no," Caroline said quickly. "I would never tell her without your permission. But, Mr. Winters, she's my niece, my only living family. When I learned Rebecca had died and left behind a daughter, I felt this overwhelming need to be part of her life, even if she never knew who I really was." Theodore looked at Caroline with new eyes. Now he could see the resemblance he had missed before. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile when she relaxed, even the way she tilted her head when listening. These were Rebecca's features, softened and changed, but unmistakably there. "Why didn't you tell me this when you first confessed?" Theodore asked, though his voice held more hurt than anger now. "Because I was afraid you would think I was trying to claim something," Caroline said desperately. "I didn't come here for money or inheritance or to take Sophie away from you. I came because she's all I have left of Rebecca, and I wanted to know her, to protect her, to give her the love I never got to give my sister. Theodore walked to the counter and braced himself against it, his emotions overwhelming him. Anger at the deception warred with understanding of Caroline's motives. He thought of Rebecca, of the secrets she had carried, of her enormous heart that had tried to save a sister the world had thrown away. My stepfather, Caroline continued, her voice urgent now. He knows I had a sister. When he gets drunk, he becomes obsessed with finding me. I'm terrified that if he discovers Rebecca had a family, he might try to use Sophie to draw me out. That's another reason I needed to be here, to watch over her, to make sure she stays safe. A dangerous revelation. Theodore spun around. You think he would target my daughter? I don't know, Caroline admitted. But he's dangerous and unpredictable. The detective I hired to monitor his movements says he's been asking questions about Rebecca's family. He hasn't found anything yet, but I couldn't take the chance. If I'm here, I can protect her. I can make sure nothing happens. Theodore felt fury building inside him. You should have told me this immediately. Sophie's safety is not something you gamble with, family or not. I know, Caroline said, stepping toward him with her hands raised. I know I handled this wrong, but please understand. I've spent my whole life being unwanted, being thrown away. When I finally found family, I lost her. Sophie is the only connection I have to Rebecca. I couldn't bear the thought of being turned away again. Theodore wanted to shout at her, to order her out of his house immediately. But when he looked at Caroline's tear-streaked face, he saw not a schemer, but a broken young woman who had been fighting alone for too long. He saw someone Rebecca had loved enough to search for, to help, to protect. Show me everything, Theodore said finally, his voice hard. Every piece of documentation proving you're Rebecca's sister, every report from your detective about your stepfather, everything. Tonight. Caroline clutched the frame to her chest, fresh tears falling. Are you sure? I'm sure, Theodore said with a small smile. We have plenty of photographs, but that one seems special to you. Keep it close. Thank you, Caroline whispered, for this and for giving me back my family. As she walked across the moonlit lawn to the guest house, Theodore watched from the patio. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges as they learned to become a real family. But for the first time since Rebecca's death, Theodore felt something he thought he had lost forever. He felt hope. The test was over. The truth had been revealed. And in the ruins of grief and secrets, something beautiful was beginning to grow. A family, wounded and imperfect, but together at last.